makes me wanna holler, go away. I need more peace and hope and love. Where do I find it in this crazy old world? I need strategies, strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio. Every time I listen, Lauren and David share strategies for living, and it makes me aware. I've got strategies for living, strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for living radio.
Oh, you know, we need them. Yeah, we need those strategies, don't we? Those strategies for living. So are you ready? You ready for your daily dose? Your daily dose of radio rehab?
I am ready
to
know who I truly am.
Oh, well, if that is your goal, our life strategist has you today. You know, for about 20 years now, our life strategist, who is a professor at the University of Chicago, his name is J. Eric Oliver. He has taught what has become a legendary course. It's called the Intelligible Self. And his students routinely describe this course as life-changing.
Sure.
And, you know, in the course of teaching over the last 20 years, and he talks about this class, people inevitably ask him, you know, give us a book to read.
Right, or a text, or something to go with.
And I mean, I think he's got about a gazillion of them in the back of his new book. But anyway, he decided, well, there is really no one book that I can give, so guess that means I've got to write one. And I am so glad that he did.
Yes.
It is called How to Know Yourself: The Art and Science of Discovering Who You Really Are.
It's a beautiful amalgamation, right, and distillation of all of these areas where they intersect, which is within us, right?
Yeah.
To really understand how we operate.
A little bit of philosophy, a little bit of theology, a little bit of psychology,
right.
You know, a little bit of physics.
Sure. I mean, because who we are is influenced by all of it.
You know, I was thinking, Lauren, you know, we've done this program for a long while now, and we talk to a lot of different people, a lot of different life strategists, but perhaps none as important as Professor J. Eric Oliver today on strategies. How to know yourself. Pretty good goal for all of us. Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate our sponsors making it all possible. The Robinson Film Center, and Azalea Cleaners, and Pintail Roofing, and Learning RX, we train your brain. The Balanced Life Wellness Center, Fertitta's Delicatessen, home of The Godfather. Alligator Italian Sausage, pretty good muffies too. SRT Sales Training, Uprising Addiction Center, and Mira Direct Primary Care. Back in a moment, we're going to meet Professor J. Eric Oliver. How to Know Yourself today, right here on Strategies for Living.
Tune in daily, find the light. Healthy mind and spirits bright. Strategies for living strong. Feel the vibe, it won't go wrong. Body moves and soul align. Catch the rhythm, feel the time. Radio rehab every day. Chase those clouds of gray away. Your daily dose of radio rehab. Lift you up when skies seem trapped. Mind and body, spirits free. Living life in harmony.
And welcome into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan. Let's welcome into the program now our life strategist. He is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. and host of the Knowing podcast. He's the author of 5 previous books on subjects ranging from the politics of obesity to magical thinking in American life. He is J. Eric Oliver. Professor, welcome into Strategies for Living.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm just pulling my honey wagon here and trying to keep it under control. You got my attention from the very beginning of the book with that story. Because we live in roughly the same area that you're talking about. And maybe we should let people in on what the honey wagon is, Professor.
Sure thing. So my family's from Southeast Texas, and my grandfather, when I was growing up, used to tell me a story of when he was a kid, and this was in the early 1900s, and the family lived in a house, and they didn't have sewage in the neighborhood or plumbing. And so the family had to relieve themselves in a little shack around the back of the house. They charmingly called the small house. And this was emptied every day by this guy named George. And George drove what my grandfather called the honey wagon.
Right.
And the honey wagon was this big horse-drawn cart with a large copper tank. And poor George had to go and empty out all the pails of human excrement and dump it into the honey wagon. And he drove around the neighborhood every day doing this. And as your listeners may well know, Southeast Texas during much of the year is brutally hot and humid. And I always just thought about this poor guy, because I was like, this must be the worst job on the planet. With the smell and just dealing with everybody else's crap and the flies. And the funny thing is, my grandfather said that George always had a smile on his face.
George was a happy fellow.
And
yeah.
He was a happy fellow. Well, and so I've always been intrigued by that. Was George happy because here he was caught in this miserable circumstance, and, he just had some sort of great philosophical insight, and he just determined to rise above his miserable circumstance and just say, you know what, I'm going to make the best of this, and I'm going to present the world with this great smile. And that's one version of it. And that might have some truth in it. Yeah. But there's another version I think is probably closer to the truth, is that George hated his job. It was a terrible job. Just a horrible job. But he was so used to it and felt so trapped in it, he couldn't imagine any other alternative. And I started the book that way because I think in a lot of ways that speaks to how a lot of us feel. I myself, for example, go through life with a lot of uncomfortable emotions, a lot of intrusive thoughts. As much as I have this great life, I kind of, there always seems to be something kind of holding me back or kind of dragging me down. And it's kind of my own honey wagon, and I feel like oftentimes so used to my miserable circumstance, I just can't imagine anything different. So I just keep driving the honey wagon around.
Yeah.
And I think this was a big motivation for me to begin teaching this class, because I was like, well, why is this? And this is the case, like a lot of people I know, like, why is it that we don't necessarily live as well as we could? And what's keeping us from really, reaching our full potential and living a really full, radiant, and, wonderful existence? And so I started teaching class trying to figure this out.
I think it's wonderful. The University of Chicago, where you teach, allowed you to they allow their professors to actually develop some courses that they offer, and your class is one of them, isn't it?
It is, and that was one of the reasons why I came here, because I started this project probably as a teenager. I had a high school English teacher who told us that if we wanted to leave a better life, we had to sort of know ourselves. And she wrote "Know Thyself" on the blackboard.
Yeah.
And I took her advice seriously. And, throughout most of my adult life, I tried all kinds of different, strategies for trying to know the self. I read deeply in philosophy. I went on long meditation retreats. I studied yoga. I went camping in the wilderness. I started reaching out to priests and gurus and anyone else I could find. and just trying to figure out, why do I keep holding on to this honey wagon? And, I had my day job as a political scientist, but I always had this abiding interest here. And, I got a job opportunity at the University of Chicago, and this is one of the world's greatest universities. And I figured out, well, if this is a place where I could find out maybe who I really am, what could be better? And they let us basically teach whatever we want. It's a really remarkable institution. And so I started putting together this class on all the subject, and the class turned out to be a real success. My students got a lot out of it. I started learning a lot out of it, and I've been doing that for the past 20 years.
I think that's fantastic. I love what your wife told you in the beginning. You were cobbling together a course of your own curiosity, I guess.
Yeah, well, she said you should just call the class Stuff I'm Interested in.
Yeah.
But you're really filling a deep need, that we've had since, you said know thyself. And that was, of course, on the temples in ancient Greece, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but know thyself. And I learned from the professor,
right?
That know thyself on the Greek temples didn't exactly mean
right
what we think of as know thyself.
Right.
Yeah.
So how would you explain that?
Yes, well, the Greeks didn't have a word that meant self in the way that we think of ourselves.
Right.
And when they wrote know thyself on the temple, what they really meant was know thy place. It was another way of saying, hey, you're about to enter this sacred building, put down your wine, put on your best tunic, stop fooling around. And, the remarkable thing is, for most of human history, know thy place is probably the best advice you could live by. Most of our ancestors lived in small groups that were tightly bound by custom and tradition. They stayed within a small geographic locale.
Right.
You were in the tribe, and you knew you had your role. And so, you didn't wonder about what your purpose in life, that was told to you. You didn't worry about finding love, because you just loved everybody that was around you. Your marriage is probably arranged for you. You didn't worry about what's my ideal career. You were told, from birth, oh, you're going to be a hunter, you're going to be a gatherer or whatnot. And that's kind of how most people lived. And then what happened about 300 some odd years ago, all of that began to change with the growth of the Enlightenment, with the rise of industrial capitalism, with this great sort of large cities beginning to emerge. And most importantly, this notion of us as individuals with rights and liberties, and, as individual consumers and as individuals, even on a romantic market, where we go on and find love through swiping left or right. We become cut off from the traditions that really held our ancestors so tight. And it's become up to us individually to figure out what our purpose is, what the meaning of life is, how we should find love. And that's kind of a daunting task for most people.
Well, yeah. And, every once in a while, Bubba comes in the control room here. And Bubba's whispering in my ear right now, what's this guy mean? I don't know myself. I know who the heck I am. What is the biggest illusion that most of us, have that keeps us blocked from really knowing ourselves, Professor?
Yeah, I would say the biggest illusion that you have, to put it simply, is that we think of ourselves as nouns when in fact we're verbs.
Oh.
In other words, we think of ourselves as a thing. So I think of myself as this thing. I'm Eric Oliver. I'm a professor. I'm a father. I assume that that's all that's me. But that's really just kind of the crust on a much, much more dynamic, multi-layered stew of processes that are going underneath it all. Because if you look at just look at your body, there's no part of your body that's static.
Right.
If you look at your cells, they're in constant motion. You're constantly regenerating all these atoms and molecules. Even, your consciousness is animated by this thought process that's constantly regenerating itself, all these electrical impulses in your brain. And so you may have, fixed habits that these things are regular habits that these things kind of coalesce into, but it's still all a process. And that's actually really good news for us, because one of the problems is when we think of ourselves as a thing is that oftentimes we think of ourselves as stuck. So, I might think of myself, oh, I'm a bad person, or I'm a worthless person, or I can't do that because, I'm stuck in some ways. Well, no, you're not stuck. You're a process. And like any process, you can be molded and changed over time.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, probably the biggest illusion is that, we think of ourselves as fixed when in fact we're really just dynamic.
Yeah. I bet your students, as the semester goes on, I bet you can see a transformation in some of them, can't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And it's terrific because at the beginning of the class, I give them this questionnaire to fill out. And I ask them these things like, who are you and what are you? And, they give, kind of straightforward answers, but they don't really, it shows that they're not really understanding what's going on underneath the hood of their own processes. Like most of us, because, most of the time we don't even think about that because why would we? We're just, we're caught up in a certain identity or a certain set of conceptions about who we are in the world. And that works for us a lot of the time. But as I was describing earlier, we may not recognize that we're dragging a big honey wagon with us.
How to Know Yourself. This is a great little book. It's just out, and you can find it out from Live Right at your favorite bookseller. How to Know Yourself, the art and science of discovering who you really are. J. Eric Oliver, and he's our life strategist today. Here on Strategies for Living, we've got more to learn, more to come. And we don't even have to worry. There's not going to be a test after this. We'll be right back.
Facing the same old problems day to day makes you want a hard get away. Looking for the road that'll get me there. Looking for hope and peace to spare. Looking for strategies. Strategies for Living Radio. Your dose of radio rehab. Strategies for Living Radio.
I got good news and bad news. Welcome back to Strategies for Living. Which one do you want first?
Give me the bad news.
The bad news?
Yeah.
Well, I said there was no test. Professor said, no, I was wrong.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
We got a pop quiz.
Yeah. You want the good news now?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's multiple guess.
Oh, all right.
and I hear that J. Eric Oliver is one of the more popular professors at the University of Chicago, so I'm counting on him grading on the curve.
Well, you can always choose all of the above.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, this is a great little book, How to Know Yourself, the art and science of discovering who you really are. It's at your favorite bookseller right now. It's a great book for really any time of the year, but especially a first of the year book.
Yes.
A middle of the year book, an end of the year book. Man.
As long as you're in a body that you think is called self, I think it's important to be able to know what it is you think you're contained in, to grapple with that.
Yeah.
And Professor Oliver has given us a great tool to grapple with.
In the course of the 20 years, Eric, that you've taught this course, you talk in the book a bit about seeing the transition of, how students and you, I guess, approach this subject. I mean, I remember reading, at first it was kind of, these are my words, not yours, very heady, very, as you would expect, academic, if you will. But you've seen kind of an evolving and a shift in that through the years, haven't you?
Yes. When I first started teaching the class, I taught it like a traditional seminar. So we would read these great works of philosophy or psychology or neuroscience, and my students would write these weekly papers. And that was good. I mean, they were delving into the material, but the class seemed, all head and no heart. It was kind of dry. And so I said, I had this realization. I was like, well, don't tell me like what Nietzsche or Freud or Socrates say. I know what they say, and you're smart. You can say what they say. Tell them what they tell you about yourself. And as soon as I started doing that, the students started writing about much deeper, more personal processes, and the class really came alive, and it became a lot more raw and messy and unfiltered. And students started really delving into like, oh, what are the sources of my unhappiness in terms of my own personal experiences? How am I living according to somebody else's expectations about who I should be? And that became a big theme of the class. Like, so one of the things I talk to my students a lot about is, I said, you're probably raised on this, what we call the gold star illusion, which is this idea that, if we just collect all of our gold stars, so I go to the right college, I get the right job, I find, somebody who seems like the perfect partner, if I get that great house, then everything will just work out. And, at the end of that is just this eternal happiness and lack of challenge that will just be waiting me. And I try to tell them that's just an illusion. And in fact, if you look at the data, where people report oftentimes their lowest levels of life satisfaction is typically in their mid 40s to mid 50s, where you would actually be at the end of this sort of gold star trajectory. Yeah. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out, well, why is that? Like, why are the expectations that we often set for ourselves of what we think is going to make a happy life actually not generating that? And so we spent a lot of time kind of delving into that.
Yeah.
How do you begin? How do you begin to help them distinguish between who they truly are, who they've learned to be, and maybe who they think they should be? How do you start to pick that apart?
Right. And so to get at that, one thing we do is we come to appreciate that this thing that we know as ourselves is based on many different processes. There's a cellular self, which is just our raw metabolic health. There's an animal self, which includes our brains and this whole our sense organs and our emotions and our cognition that are working to try to map the world and make sense of everything. And then there's this egoistic self, which is the part of us that has our names and identities and is there to try to help us get what we think we need and want from other people. And the problem is that we get so attached to a certain kind of egoistic self. And it's the way that we know our egoistic selves is through our stories.
Right.
If you think about, like, for example, what therapy is going in and you're just talking about your stories.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how you know this effusive ego thing. Now, the problem is a lot of the stories that we live by, we didn't write. They were ones written for us by other people.
Sure.
And so one of the first things I do with my students is I get them to say, okay, what are the stories that you're living by? And did you write these stories or did someone else write this story for you? And I'll give you an example of this. Like, I have a lot of students who are either the children of immigrants or first generation in college, and their families sacrificed so much for them to go to school. They are their vessel of their parents' ambitions. And they carry around an enormous feeling of guilt from that and burden. And, and they oftentimes describe how heavy that weighs on them and, how much difficulty that causes them. And so one of the things I do with them, I say, well, is that something that should be a source of guilt? That's one story. Or maybe you can, switch that around and see that as something as a place for gratitude and interact with your life from a place of gratitude rather than a place of guilt. And that kind of just that little shift in perspective and that little shift in how you tell your story about, what you owe your parents and what you owe the world can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge reframe. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things in this book that as I was reading it, moving through it, and I wonder if your students feel the same way. There's so many things in here that I would read and my mind would go, Lauren had to clean the wall several times. Yeah, and I'll give you
in a good way, I hope.
Yeah, in a good way. Let me give you an example. You write about consciousness, and you say at this moment, two remarkable and mysterious events are going on. First, you're having an experience of your own being. You're conscious. Second, Nobody knows precisely how this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I wanted you to. I wanted you to clean the wall here.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, let me pull out my sponge then. So, consciousness is one of these things that is just the great mystery to science. And here's part of our challenge is that we all have an intuitive sense of what consciousness is. Consciousness is this feeling of being me. And, if you look at what the most common explanation for consciousness that's across human history is that it's called dualism. And there's there's this body that, I inhabit, but then there seems to be this separate part, this me that's apart from the body. And, a lot of people call that the mind. Some people call that the soul. In the Asian traditions, they called it the Atman. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to believe that this, soul Atman is not going to be living forever, that somehow or another is detached from the body and distinct from the body. But the challenge is that science says, well, that's not really the case. Everything that we know of in terms of this experience of being that we're having right now is just generated from all of these neurons in our brain. And so then the question is, well, how are these neurons then generating a sense of self? How is all this tissue and, at some level just molecules, how are they having this whole self experience? And to understand that, I think it's important for us to go and see what our animal self is doing. And we oftentimes think of our animal self as a problem to be overcome. The animal self is the part of me that wants to sleep in or eat too much ice cream or, lust after whomever. It's all those sort of bad animalistic desires. And that kind of shortchanges our animal self. Our animal self is something far more sublime. And at the core of what our animal self is this perception apparatus. It's there trying to take in all this information from the world, make maps of reality, and then most importantly, predict what it thinks is going to happen next. Mm-hmm. And that is the seat of our consciousness. Because really, this experience of being that we're having right now is really our brains predicting the world and then putting us a representation of us in it to help with those predictions. So it's out there taking all this information in, and at some point it says, well, it's taking information about itself too. So we have this experience of our own body, and so it says, okay, I need to have a marker here on this map, and I have this marker that I'll call a me, and then I can sort of predict, okay, if this me is moving through this map, what does it need to do? What's going to happen next? And that's really kind of what is generating this experience of consciousness within us.
Yeah. Once you put the book out, how long's the book been out, Professor?
It comes out January 6th, so I'm not sure when we're airing, but wherever it is relative to January 6th.
Well, we're right at airing time. It's hitting the bookstores. Yeah.
So it's hot off the presses.
Yeah. Where do you want people to begin? And I don't mean at the beginning of the book. Obviously, they're going to begin at the introduction, most people. And, they're going to read about the honey wagon, the things that we've talked about. But as they dive into the book and their mind, like my little mind, begins to get blown, do you have a recommendation? And I tell you what, I got to go to break here. But think about this question, because when we come back, let's talk a little bit about it. Once you're about, a quarter of the way or midway through the book and your little mind, like mine, is going, what do you suggest that people do? I bet some people get angry in your class, and some people get sad in your class, and some people get, very confused in your class. So I'm wondering what you do with your students, and as we read the book, what you're going to tell us to do. We'll talk about that when we come back. How to know yourself, the art and science of discovering who you really are. At your favorite bookseller right now. J. Eric Oliver, our life strategist today on Strategies for Living.
We all have problems every day. We all need along the way. We need strategies, strategies, strategies for living radio.
And welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan. What are you over there smiling about?
I'm excited. I'm taking it all in. I'm taking notes.
You're taking notes, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might have to go sign up for Professor Oliver's class.
It's cold in Chicago. Just know that.
Yeah, you got a point.
J. Eric Oliver, our life strategist today. The book is How to Know Yourself, the Art and Science of Discovering Who You Really Are. If you're looking for a book to start the year, this is a good one. This is a great one. How to Know Yourself.
No better one.
All right, so, I'm just guessing, Eric, that you probably have to keep a fire extinguisher or two in the class for when people get really pissed at what they're learning, or people get really sad, or people get really, confused about what, as you delve into this. What do you tell them? How do you handle that? And what do you tell us? Because as we begin to get into this book, we're going to have to confront some of that within ourselves.
Sure thing. And, I think that's probably the hardest part about knowing yourself is generating the courage to know yourself. Because once you start peering into it, you might find a lot of things that make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Going back to George and the honey wagon, we hold on to the honey wagon because we think we need it for our survival. Yeah. And, when in fact, oftentimes we don't. And that's really what, I think is oftentimes the biggest obstacle to living better is this fact that we cling to a lot of imbalances in our own self processes. And so when these negative feelings come up, when this anger comes up, when this sadness comes up, one of the things I tell my students is, okay, let's stop. Let's examine that. What is that anger telling you? What is that sadness telling you? How can you let those emotions, instead of just running from them or reacting to them, how can you sort of stop and say, wow, what is that feeling teaching me right now? What is it trying to communicate to me? And odds are it's probably signaling some part of the imbalances within your own self processes.
Damn, Eric, you're a political scientist, but you've become quite a therapist through the years.
Well, it's a side effect of teaching this class.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that it's kind of came out at me as I was moving through the book is this is a great therapy book.
Yeah.
I mean, Lauren's a therapist. I'm a life coach. We're going to order a case of these and give them out.
Well, thank you very much. My publisher's going to appreciate that.
There you go. And go ahead.
What I really hope that the book can provide, and really what I want my class to provide more than anything else, is to help people expand the vocabulary of their own lived experience.
Yeah.
So, that's part of the problem that we get stuck is that we don't necessarily know all the right words or concepts to identify what's going on.
Right.
And once we can begin to develop and enrich our own vocabulary of every moment, we can begin to get a much clearer sense of where our imbalances lie. And that's kind of the real challenge of the end goal of self-knowledge is to achieve some kind of transcendence. I mean, if you look at any spiritual tradition or philosophical tradition, they're all pointing to how can we transcend these imbalances? How can we live in a more radiant, effervescent, peaceful way?
Yeah.
And the task of doing that, there's this two-step task here. First is identifying, okay, where am I out of alignment? Is it my animal self that's out of alignment? Is it my cellular self? And am I not eating right and sleeping right and just taking care of the basics? A lot of times the problems just start there.
Right.
Or am I holding on to too many negative stories about myself or other people? Do I spend all of my waking hours, caught in like the tight grip of resentment or, sadness or fear? And if we have an expanded vocabulary, we can begin to recognize that, this thought that I thought was so real, that maybe it's not real. Maybe that's just, my fear talking.
Yeah.
And I often tell my students to say, stop and say, okay, is the thought that you're having a lot of the time, is that thought helping anything? And if you're like me, I would say the vast majority of my thoughts are not that helpful. If I just sort of stop and look at them. And so then that brings us to the next step. Once we begin to recognize where these imbalances lie, and we utilize this expanded vocabulary, then we can begin to take the next step, which in some ways is even harder, which is to let go of them and to realize that, these old habits of mine that I think I need, I don't really need. A lot of the ego needs that I have, that, I need to get, I need to go online and get, likes on a tweet or something like that. That's what I need to feel good about myself. I need, to finally do something so that, my mom and dad will finally love me, or, any number of things, you can imagine that, finding, getting past a relationship with an inappropriate person or an abusive person. These imbalances show up in so many different domains of our lives. And then the challenge here is, once we recognize where those imbalances are, letting go of them and saying that, I don't need to be that, I don't need to be the good little boy. I don't need to be in a relationship with someone who's harmful to me. I don't need to be perfect in that regard. And, it's an ongoing process, because those are based on these mental habits. They're not easy to let go of, because our brains, it's the honey wagon. We're holding on to them because we think they're necessary for survival. But boy, once we get into the practice of letting go, and we start doing that on a daily level, you just find your life gets so much lighter. And suddenly your field of attention expands to include this kind of what I describe as this latent effervescence that lies within us. It's our birthright. It's this really radiant energy that comes up within us that most of the time we're not conscious of, because it's too subtle. It's just kind of below the surface. But when you can quiet all the noise down, that becomes available to you, and it's a much, much better way of living.
Man, what a world this would be. I was joking about getting a stack of these books and handing them out in therapy and life coaching, but
I'm not joking.
what a world this would be if more people, dove into this, took your course, read your book, or did something to discover who they really are.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to do something helpful here, and that's really the ultimate purpose of this, is to try to help other people, and maybe in the course of doing that, make the world a slightly better place.
I think you're doing it,
it's
and
truly priceless.
It is. This is. There's several books out there that I think are timeless, and I think this is destined to be one of them. Get your copy of it, folks. It's called How to Know Yourself: The Art and Science of Discovering Who You Really Are. The author is Professor J. Eric Oliver. But don't expect him to be your typical college professor. This is engaging stuff. Truly is. And we'll be back. More strategies for living to come with life strategist J. Eric Oliver today. Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. What a great book. What a great life strategist, J. Eric Oliver.
Man, and I have a sense his students get way more than a grade.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, really. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan, our life strategist, the author of How to Know Yourself. You got to get this book. J. Eric Oliver, available at your favorite bookseller. Okay, Professor, hard question here. You've got 1 minute. What do you want to leave us with? What do you want to... We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of territory today. What do you really want people to take away from our conversation here today?
Sure. Lauren, David, first off, just thank you so much again for having me on. It's been such a great pleasure to talk to you both. And I would just say, the last thing I would say, and this is what I tell my students, you have a better way of living than you may otherwise know. And, within this, exists this great potential for a much more peaceful, radiant, and well-balanced self. And if we can muster the curiosity and the courage to begin to delve into that and begin exploring, and there are a lot of different ways you can do that, but once you take that first step down that road, you realize that, going back is no longer an alternative.
Yeah, life changes.
And so, that's really what I think life is ultimately about. Our purpose in life is really about trying to optimize these self processes. And that starts with curiosity and courage. And I think, just listening to your show, I would imagine most of your listeners are already exhibiting that to some degree.
Thank you.
We
Thank
hope
you.
so.
Thank you for this book. Thank you for being a great life strategist. We're going to have you back. Folks, continue the conversation by getting a copy of How to Know Yourself, Art and Science of Discovering Who You Really Are. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate our sponsors, the Robinson Film Center, Azalea Cleaners, Pintail Roofing, Learning RX, We Train Your Brain, the Balanced Life Wellness Center, Fertitas Delicatessen, home of The Godfather, Alligator Italian Sausage, SRT Sales Training, Uprising, Addiction Center, and Mira, Direct Primary Care. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call to make, who would you call? And what would you say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For Lauren Leon McMillan and for J. Eric Oliver, I'm David McMillan. See you next time right here on Strategies for Living.